Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Staying home, staying in your immediate neighborhood.
As the third wave of COVID-19 arrives in BC, health officials spell out what don't travel means. Also,
is it because I'm a black guy in Vancouver?
Why a BC man suspects he was racially profiled by Icbc.
And more than just a pretty picture, the history behind Metro Vancouver's stunning cherry blossoms.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Well, BC's provincial health officer has sharpened her message, saying we are very clearly in the third wave of COVID-19.
Zara Premji is here live with us tonight. Zara, cases and hospitalizations rising. What's the province saying about trying to contain the spread of the virus right now?
We've heard her say before to stay in your community, but today Dr. Henry is tightening that message significantly, now asking people to stay home and in your immediate neighborhood.
If you live in North Van, you should not be traveling to Langley or to Richmond. If you live in the Lower Mainland, you should not be traveling to the island. If you live in Penticton, you should not be going to Sun Peaks or Oliver or Kelowna right now.
Henry still isn't going as far as saying she'll ban people from moving across the province. She says right now about 50% of cases in BC are one of the variants, so people need to be more on guard. But people are getting frustrated with what seems to be mixed messaging. And we saw that again today. Dr. Henry saying you can see a small number of people outside your household, but then saying even that is discouraged. So I asked her to clarify.
It's about trying to find things that we can do safely and people recognizing that they need to make decisions for themselves about how to do that and that we know what we can do here in BC. So it's not meant to parse everything apart. If you have any doubts about it, don't do it right now.
Okay, Zara, there's also a lot of confusion right now around people who can register for a vaccine and people who can actually book. Let's clear that up.
Well, every few days, the province opens up registration to a new age group, but that does not mean you can actually book your vaccine. Registering is different than booking. So first, you can register on the Get Vaccinated platform to get into the registration system, and then you'll be contacted to actually book through a unique link to your email or text, but only when it's your age group's turn to book. And to make things even more complicated, you can actually technically register on the site at any time. Take me, for example. I've already registered, and I know, Anita, you've also registered as well. So the age reminders are just that, a reminder to register, but not a vaccine appointment just yet.
Absolutely. Zara Premji live for us tonight. Thanks, Zara. Nearly 3,300 cases of COVID-19 have been recorded in the last 3 days in BC, while the number of patients in critical care has risen to a record high. There are now 368 people hospitalized. That's an 11% increase over the weekend. Of those, 121 are in intensive care. Sadly, 18 more people have died of COVID-19, and Dr. Bonnie Henry says most of the recent deaths involve people in their 60s and 70s who live in the community.
To one of BC's COVID hotspots now, where a 2-week mass vaccination program began this morning. As
Greg Rasmussen reports, all adults who live and work in Whistler can now get the shot.
First in line and eager to get the vaccine.
Everybody I've talked to is very excited and stoked that this is happening in Whistler.
The ski resort has been a COVID hotspot, which is why the province is now vaccinating the entire community of 10,000. Housing shortages and tight living conditions for workers were blamed for fueling the spread of the virus.
All the frontline staffers are mountain, restaurants, retail. They're all living 4, 5, 6, 8 to one building.
That's been the primary weakness or Achilles heel for us, is the amount of congregate housing that we have, and that's where we've seen the virus move the most, and I think that's really why we find ourselves here.
Whistler has also been criticized for staying open through much of the ski season, a magnet for out-of-towners, despite the BC government asking but not ordering people to stay away. But at the end of March, the province did order the mountain to close after one of the world's biggest outbreaks of the P1 variant outside of Brazil.
So we know that has had a significant impact on the community there, and that has also now translated out of the community into other parts of the Lower Mainland and BC.
Family physician Dr. Barinder Narang wants this strategy deployed in other parts of BC as well, particularly in racialized communities that have been hit hardest.
But we also know that there's still a raging fire in certain communities, other communities, that we need to make sure we're putting out as well.
Relief is already being felt in Whistler today.
It's hard not to get emotional. The nurses too, you can't help it.
And we're going in the right direction and looking forward to getting the second dose in another, 4 months. Bye, thanks.
One of thousands hoping this crash program will restore Whistler's reputation as a place to escape rather than to worry. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Whistler, BC.
And a community-based vaccination approach is also underway on Vancouver Island. Concerns are growing about a potential case climb in small island communities driven by tourists and the arrival of seasonal workers laid off amid the Whistler shutdown. But relief is on the way for some as whole community vaccinations continue to roll out. Ucluelet is among several island communities whose rollouts begin this week.
Well, since it came into effect, more than 100 passengers arriving at YVR have refused the mandatory hotel quarantine. Since February 22nd, air travelers arriving here are required to self-isolate in a government-sanctioned hotel for 3 days. But Canada's Public Health Agency says 106 passengers have been ticketed for refusing to comply. They can face fines of up to $3,000, which is much more than the cost of booking quarantine hotel accommodation. So far in April, the BC Centre for Disease Control says 23 flights in and out of YVR have had at least one infected passenger on board.
And the Vancouver Canucks are getting ready to return to the ice after a COVID variant swept through the team. But some players admit packing 19 remaining games into 1 month is a big challenge.
That's a pretty crazy schedule if, everyone's healthy. Who knows how guys are going to react when they come back. Hopefully it is good.
The team is scheduled to play Friday against Edmonton after the COVID outbreak forced them to postpone 8 games. 21 players and 4 staff members tested positive for a COVID variant. General Manager Jim Benning says 10 players skated today, and the remainder of the season will be a chance for team prospects to shine.
A Black man who has lived in Vancouver for more than 2 decades is questioning a lengthy Icbc investigation into his residency status.
As Mel Puri of the CBC Impact Team reports, he suspects he was racially profiled when he tried to renew his driver's license.
There was nothing untoward as far as Dion Drakes was concerned about his October visit to Icbc to renew his driver's license.
Went through the process, thought everything was fine, and left expecting to receive my license in the mail.
Instead, in late December, 2 months after the fact, what came in the mail was a letter from Icbc. It said Drake's BC residency was in question. He called the insurance corporation. No one could explain why the Vancouver marketing consultant hadn't been told sooner or why an investigation was even necessary.
Is it because I'm a black guy in Vancouver and there's not that many black people here? Am I not supposed to be living here?
Icbc says it takes allegations of discrimination seriously. It agrees it should have told Drakes immediately that he was under investigation, and it has apologized. The corporation also shared internal notes with CBC, and they indicate the investigation was triggered by a remark made by Drakes.
According to the Icbc papers, Drakes was overheard saying, "I am a Canadian resident, but don't necessarily live here."
I did not say that. That's a blatant fabrication.
You think they just made it up?
Yeah, absolutely. They're covering themselves.
Icbc didn't provide an on-camera interview, but maintains the notes are accurate. Drakes was born in Trinidad. He's lived in Canada for 39 years, the last 20 in BC, and the last 11 in the same Vancouver building. Drake says he's experienced racial profiling before.
In the past, I haven't spoken out about it, but I'm older now and I have my voice. I'm not going to let things like that slide. It's just not acceptable.
Icbc couldn't say how often it does residency investigations, nor could it speak to the ethnicity of the people who are investigated.
there's not necessarily going to be a paper trail, but the burden is always on the person who faces racism and never on the people who are actually perpetrating it.
It took Drakes 4 months to get his license renewed and maintains he never received an adequate explanation for the investigation. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
The family of a man killed by police in Maple Ridge a year and a half ago is renewing its call for criminal charges against officers. Kya Din was shot and killed by officers during a mental health call in August of 2019. The case was looked into by the Independent Investigations Office, which found officers acted reasonably. Din's family appealed to the chief civilian director, but has been told charges will not be recommended.
Immensely aggravated and compounded our trauma, grief, and sorrow that we've been suffering due to George Sergeant horrendous death. Because
Din's siblings claim the version of the incident shared by the officers and paramedics at the scene isn't true. They say their brother, who had schizophrenia, wasn't acting violently and wasn't at risk of harming himself. A coroner's inquest into the incident is expected, but that inquest is meant to make recommendations to prevent deaths in similar situations in the future, not assign blame.
A Burnaby man will spend more time in jail for refusing to remove a revenge website targeting his ex-wife. 47-year-old Patrick Fox has been sentenced to another year and 4 months for disobeying court orders to take the website down. Fox was first sentenced in 2017 for an online harassment campaign against his ex-wife. He created the revenge site and sent thousands of emails, falsely accusing her of white supremacy, child abuse, and drug addiction. Fox's case is considered a landmark in Canada for the use of criminal harassment charges against online attacks.
Well, starting today, streets in front of 3 Vancouver elementary schools are being closed to vehicle traffic during pickup and drop-off times.
As Isabel Regem reports, it's part of a pilot project that aims to get more parents to use active transportation to get the kids to and from school.
School drop-off and pickup looked a bit different today at Van Horn Elementary.
Cars are usually parked all day across the street.
But not today or for the next 4 weeks. The school is one of 3 Vancouver schools implementing a car-free block by closing one adjacent street to vehicles for 30 to 40 minutes, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. It's part of a pilot project aimed at understanding the benefits of a so-called school street.
This year we've seen there is much more cars than usually, so we wanted to promote somehow active travel and to promote kids walking and biking more.
3/4 of parents were in favor of this initiative.
Lord Roberts and Hastings Elementary are also part of the pilot.
Especially like the idling of vehicles.
This researcher in air pollution says one of the likely benefits is cleaner air for kids to breathe in.
We're especially concerned with this sort of traffic exhaust, and we use one pollutant called nitrogen dioxide as an indicator of that. And it really will drop off quite dramatically, like 1 block away.
But some have voiced concerns.
In terms of city policy, to me, it feels like greenwashing.
Anusha Belram's child does not go to one of the 3 schools, but believes the program prioritizes 2-parent households.
Like something as minute as like, let's close the street for 20 minutes, and then it's like calling upon me to talk about my my experience as a single parent. Like, it's a lot.
The city argues the pilot provides options.
We know some parents still need to drive. By encouraging some who can and want to make the shift, that reduction in vehicles makes it safer for all who would be arriving at the school.
The changes will last until May 7th. Then the City of Vancouver will collect feedback from the community. If successful, more school streets could be introduced in the city and beyond. Isabel Regem, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's Lieutenant Governor has delivered the government speech from the throne, COVID edition.
It provides a preview of next week's budget and is a blueprint of the NDP's agenda for the upcoming year. Tanya Fletcher is live with more. Tanya, take us through some of the highlights from today's throne speech.
Yeah, the pandemic remains the province's overwhelming priority, and that was clear today. The throne speech had a COVID-19 theme woven all the way through it, and not surprisingly, first and foremost on the NDP's priority list is improving health care in BC. So let's take a look. In the next year, thousands of new workers will be hired for long-term care, and the government vows to fix the cracks COVID-19 has exposed in the care system. It also hints at permanent changes to the way surgeries are done in BC to reduce wait times, and more hospitals and urgent primary care centers will be built too. As for some of the other highlights, especially with affordability, there will be new spending to build thousands of what they're calling missing middle rental homes province-wide. The NDP again saying it'll expand on its $10 a day childcare promise to open up more spaces. As for economic recovery, we'll see legislation to help companies keep jobs locally here in BC. And on climate, the province will bring in more incentives to make it easier, for example, to buy electric vehicles. There was also an acknowledgement in the throne speech that the pandemic has hit some people harder than others.
Women have been more likely to lose a job or feel forced out of the workforce. Young people have missed out on work opportunities and vital social connections. Indigenous peoples, Black people, people of color, as well as those working in frontline jobs in the gig economy, have all been affected disproportionately.
And so there was a rather vague promise to make targeted investments to make sure none of those people are left behind in the pandemic recovery. But overall, a lot of the speech simply repeated previously announced initiatives or a continuation of existing programs.
And Tanya, what about reaction? How's the speech being received?
Yeah, the opposition was quick to criticize it, not surprisingly, but today's throne speech was underwhelming and sparse on details, according to the BC Liberals. They wanted to see a concrete plan to deal with economic recovery, unemployment, and the opioid crisis. They say it's a day of disappointment, saying it offers virtually no help or support for right now and in the short term.
This is a second-term government. This is a government where a premier sought a majority by calling a snap election during a pandemic. And today we see little help, little hope, and in fact, very little assistance for British Columbians who are struggling.
And the BC Greens are also critical, saying this speech lacked clear vision for the future. They say it doesn't outline a plan to address gaping holes in mental health care or to tackle the housing affordability crisis in any meaningful way. And they were disappointed to see no mention of a green recovery either. But stay tuned. We will see a more specific breakdown of spending in the budget that'll be unveiled next week. Mike, Anita.
Thanks, Tanya. Music programs in schools are on the chopping block in the Greater Victoria School District. A $1.5 million cut to programs is being proposed. The district identified a deficit of $7 million based on a decrease in revenue and an increase in expenses. The proposed budget shows a cut to middle school band, strings, and choir, along with elementary strings. That includes more than $16,000 to the ukulele program. District trustees will review the proposal tomorrow, but there is a lot of community backlash. Students protested today as well. And joining us now is meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Johanna, I know temperatures are creeping up this week, so any indication that there's forest fire threat just yet?
Yes, I'm glad we're bringing this up first because this is going to be the start of wildfire and runoff season. We were just waiting for this long, dry stretch. So I actually want to take you to the fire danger rating for today. This is the first time we're showing that. And, first time this season, we've been seeing low to very low for the past few weeks as we started the spring season off. But you can see those yellows and a little spot of orange in there, moderate to high, starting to build in the interior. And the Prince George Fire Center reporting their first fire of the season over the weekend. It was put out quickly, or under control quickly, I should say, but it was caused by a campfire that spread because of strong winds. So officials urging people to just be extra cautious with outdoor burning. It may seem still cool, but things are going to ramp up. now I can take you to some of those temperatures with that in mind, because it is also going to be very enjoyable as we head into our first real warm stretch of the season. 11's right now at YVR, and I'm going to take you through one of our first night without a risk of frost for most of Metro Vancouver. Overnight lows staying around 3, 4s, and 5s. And check out tomorrow's forecast highs across Metro Vancouver. Yes, those are some high teen temperatures for parts of Metro Vancouver. So I'll break it all down and tell you just how hot we're going to get by the end of the week coming up.
Wow, love that. Thanks, Jo. Well, their pretty pink petals are more than just an Instagram photo op. Japanese cherry blossom trees have a rich history here in Vancouver.
Our GP Mendoza spoke with an organizer of the Sakura Days Festival about the tree's history and why they're so significant in Japan's culture.
The cherry blossoms are well regarded in Japanese culture because they are the national tree of Japan, and there are many reasons for this. One of the main reasons is from 100 years ago, when rice was grown as a staple crop in Japan, the cherry blossom timing of the flowers coincided with the time that it was right to start planting your rice crops. Another reason is because in Japan, the school year runs from April to March. So when the cherry blossoms bloom, it signified the time for kids to start a new year of school. But the main reason why the cherry blossom is so loved in Japan is because of the brevity of its beauty. These blossoms only last in bloom for about 2 weeks at a time. So it's a good reminder of life and the brevity of life and the beauty of things that don't last forever. Hanami is literally flower watching in Japanese. So once the flowers start to bloom along the river banks or in parks in Japan, families and friends will gather underneath the cherry blossom trees. They'll lay out picnic tarps and bring food and drink and enjoy the beauty of these petals and as well as the company of their friends and family. So in the early 1930s, the mayor of Kobe and Yokohama in Japan donated cherry blossom trees to be planted around the war memorial that's in Stanley Park, that's dedicated to the Japanese Canadian soldiers who fought in World War I. And then afterwards, in the 1950s, more trees were donated by the Consul General at that time, and those are the trees that you see planted around Vancouver. The reasoning behind the donation of the cherry blossom trees is basically just to show the beauty, to share the beauty of these trees with the different Japanese Canadian communities across the ocean. It kind of brings a little bit of that Japanese culture or tradition here to Canada, and I like to see that.
Yeah, certainly very big in Japanese culture, and my goodness, I mean they look fantastic right now.
Oh, they're incredible. We have tons all around us, and every day, tons of people coming to take photos. I've seen some pretty amazing costumes and some big ball gowns. It's fun.
Yes, get dressed up to see the cherry blossoms.
Yeah.
Okay, just a quick reminder, you can also watch this newscast live on CBC Gem.
CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.
A dire situation in Ontario, case counts so high, ICU rates pushed to the limit, and now hospitals are running out of staff. More on that next.
Thank you for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, it started as a way to find something in common between their grandmothers, and it's turned into a game everyone can play.
A Toronto area couple reimagined the traditional game of mahjong to get their families to connect. And this is how Not Your Ma's Zhong was created.
So many prototypes. Creating this required a lot of work, and we're doing this as a passion project. The idea for Not Your Ma's Zhong came about in 2018 when we were pregnant with our first daughter. We knew that she was going to grow up both part Jewish, Hungarian, Italian, and also half Chinese. So we wanted to celebrate that in a way by incorporating parts of our family story into a game.
Great. Yeah, Not Your Mahjong is a 3 to 4 player game. The objective is to try to match 3 sets of 3 cards across the different suits that we have, plus a pair, and that's how you win a round.
I remember Adam cutting out like index cards and figuring out the sizing, how could you fit 10 cards in your hand comfortably. So we were looking at regular card sizes or bridge card sizes.
And we also, of course, had to make sure that the gameplay was fun, so we spent a lot of time on the mechanics of it. Mahjong is traditionally 144 tiles or so, depending on the version, and we got the card game down to 75 different cards. So really making sure that probabilities made sense, that the stealing rules were fast-paced and fierce, as we like to say, and that people would have a lot of fun with it. And we wanted to make the illustrations on the cards really fun, so they're centered around memories of our grandmothers. We imagined also a set where maybe they had met earlier in life and they lived closer together and they were friends, so what kind of fun things could they do? Playing bingo together, doing Tai Chi in the park.
My favorite one is the red one. The fortune kitty is pretty iconic, and a lot of Asian families will have a version of a fortune kitty sitting in their home somewhere.
I love the love card, just that image of growing up and grandma's just getting in your face, trying to give you lots of kisses. And I think that's really the message of Not Your Mahjong, to celebrate your culture, your traditions, and really be proud of those. And also to call your grandma if you still have the opportunity. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you.
Have you ever played?
No, but we lived in Hong Kong many years ago, and the sounds of people playing Mahjong, the clacking, and it's different than what we just saw there, but yeah, it's wildly popular, and this is a kind of a cool version.
Very cool. All right, we'll be back in a few moments with national and international news. It's all coming up. Ontario reporting 4,400 cases of COVID-19 today, and the situation in hospitals is getting bad.
CBC's Chris Glover tells us tonight ICUs are running out of space and staff shortages are imminent.
Too many patients, too few nurses. That's the crisis at Humber River Hospital's ICU, so nurses and doctors from other units are being reassigned to intensive care.
It's pretty extraordinary when a doctor is trained all their life to do, brain surgery or gallbladder surgery or chest surgery, and now is helping to turn a patient who's critically ill in the ICU on life support machines.
But ICU nursing is typically 8 months of special training.
Some of them it has been condensed into 4 months, but it cannot be done in 2 days, and that's the situation now.
The Registered Nurses Association says last year nurses were recalled from retirement to help in some 200 nursing homes. Back then, 700 ICU nurses were identified as potential reinforcements.
We can say, can you please come back and help here? So far, the province has not requested that.
Hospitals running out of staff are also coping by transferring patients hours away.
We've been transferring anywhere between 2 and 10 patients a day to other hospitals.
The Ottawa Hospital says so far at least 3 GTA COVID patients have been sent to Ottawa.
We're in the fortunate position of being on the receiving end, meaning we have more capacity.
Alarm bells rang on April 1st when 430 COVID patients were in Ontario ICUs, surpassing Wave 2's high. Today, more than 600 COVID patients are in critical care.
This virus is on the attack, and it is trying desperately to bring hospitals to their knees. It's essentially cannibalizing most other health services.
A new provincial directive kicks in today, suspending thousands of elective surgeries. That happened during Wave 1 and created a backlog with devastating effects.
None of these people will be forgotten.
The health minister says it's a critical step to help ICUs cope. But in Toronto, in lockdown since November, demonstrators took to the street this weekend, struggling to see the point, while doctors are struggling to explain the impact they see every day.
Whenever you're intubating somebody in their 20s or 30s, it's not a good day.
Chris Glover with that report from Toronto. In Montreal, meantime, hundreds of protesters gathered in a popular tourist district last night to protest against the 8 p.m. curfew.
As Matt Demers reports, things turned violent, and now business owners are clearing up shattered storefronts after being targeted by rioters.
It started out loudly but peacefully. Hundreds coming together to protest Montreal's 8 p.m. curfew. The crowd was mostly young and many didn't wear masks. As darkness fell and the curfew came into effect, the mood took a turn. After the fireworks, someone lit a fire in a garbage can and the fire grew. Police eventually moved in, sending people running. As some threw objects at storefronts, riot police locked the area down, and in the light of day, damage from the rioting was clear. Businesses did what they could to patch up broken and damaged windows. This restaurant owner says someone threw a trash can lid through his.
We're all on the same boat over here, and when I see this, I'm like, are we really on the same boat over here? Are we really in solidarity with each other? I'm really mad. I'm like, I don't need this. It's a layer on top of everything that we have right now.
Across the street, another owner tried to make sense of how the protest was handled.
How were the police not aware? And why did they show up an hour after the protest started? And why did they push them all in one direction? Well, it didn't seem very well organized on the police side.
As chatter mounts about more anti-curfew protests, Mayor Valérie Plante denounced those who caused damage and defended last night's police response.
When it escalates, sometimes it can go really fast, and police officers are well aware that depending on the situation, if they jump in, let's put it this way, it can add even more fuel to the fire. So there has to be a balance, and I trust them with their ability to find the right balance.
Montreal police handed out more than 100 tickets last night and arrested 7 people. A spokesperson says dozens of acts of mischief and criminal fires are under investigation. Matt Damour, CBC News, Montreal.
Another record-breaking day for COVID-19 cases in India, with nearly 169,000 reported. The country has now surpassed Brazil when it comes to infections. Malls, bars, and restaurants have been forced to close their doors, while migrant workers in large cities like Mumbai head home for fear of a travel lockdown. The government is blaming people for the resurgence in cases by not wearing masks and crowding. India has now recorded 13.5 million cases of COVID-19, putting it just behind the U.S. overall.
After months of strict lockdowns, a small taste of normal life for people in England today. The easing of restrictions brought crowds into the streets and onto patios.
But as Renee Filipponi explains, some worry officials are banking too much on the country's rapid vaccine rollout.
Streets across England were bursting with people today, eager to break free of lockdown and take in some retail therapy. All but essential businesses here have been closed since early January. Pints were poured for the first time in months, though service is only allowed on patios. Some were eager, showing up at this pub 1 minute after midnight.
After 14 months of not going anywhere except funerals, it's a great plus. Yeah, very exciting.
There were also lines at barber shops and hair salons, along with gyms and zoos, all of which have taken a huge financial hit during lockdown.
We're an expensive business. It's about £1 million a month to feed the animals. So with no income coming in, that's been really, really tough.
The government is crediting the success of its vaccine program for today's freedom. 32 million people have had their first dose of either the Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccine. But the jubilance comes at a time when many are still mourning. This memorial wall is painted with 150,000 hearts. Each marks a life lost to COVID in the UK. For this woman who lost her grandfather, there is unease about reopening.
I think people need to make sure that, they're taking other people into account and protecting themselves, make sure they're sanitizing and, doing the social distancing.
Experts say the government is relying too heavily on the vaccine program, and if new variants take hold, another COVID spike is possible.
I think the government very much is thinking of these as some sort of a silver bullet strategy, whereas what they need to really be focusing on is a comprehensive public health measure where these can be a part.
People are clearly enjoying their new reality, but the government is urging them to behave responsibly. And if everything goes to plan, the next phase of reopening will happen in mid-May. That will mean indoor dining, at-home visits with friends, even the potential for international travel. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
Hospitalizations in BC from COVID are up 11% over the last 3 days. Just ahead, we go to the front lines with Dr. Michael Curry and his concerns about the rising number of patients.
We're looking at the coastline of the southern part of British Columbia's mainland.
The problem is that the 49th parallel agreed on as the international boundary really didn't make allowances for Point Roberts.
Now, if you're a school kid from Point Roberts, you commute to Blaine, Washington, 4 border crossings per day. But that's only one of the anomalies of life in this American outpost, as Marjorie Gage is about to tell us.
The windward beaches of Point Roberts look south and west across the Strait of Georgia. The waters off these beaches, to a line somewhere midway out in the strait, are American. And American fishermen get first chance at the great runs of salmon passing here on their way to the mouth of the Fraser. The value of the annual catch to the American fishermen is estimated in the millions. Summer campers from Canada discovered the beaches and the pleasures of clam digging at Boundary Bay on the lee side a long time ago, soon after the turn of the century. And they've been coming down in increasing numbers, building their summer cottages on the point ever since. Today, over 3,000 of the 3,500 summer residents and 200 of the 400 permanent residents are Canadians. The drive from Vancouver takes about half an hour, and in the last few years, an exclusive subdivision has fanned out along the Canadian side of the border. The $40,000 and $50,000 homes of commuting Vancouver executives stopped short just a step away from the 1846 Washington Treaty Monument, westernmost landmark on the 49th parallel. The problems posed by that boundary in 1969 are of special concern to the social credit MLA for the boundary riding of Delta, Robert Wenman. And here we are standing on the border, Mr. Wenman, and it hardly seems possible, since you can't see a line, we can see a monument, that so many problems should arise from something that is so innocuous.
Yes, this unguarded border, but while it is unguarded, it is presenting many problems for us in the development of the Point Roberts area. And certainly we must move towards a concrete discussion and action on getting this situation changed.
Well, now, what proposals are you making?
Well, I have in mind several proposals, and there are almost as many. We could spend all afternoon talking about the possibilities, but I think that one of the most significant possibilities here is a lease arrangement. Now, I would prefer that the United States would just give this to Canada.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
In the past, I haven't spoken out about it, but, I'm older now and I have my voice. I'm not going to let things like that slide. It's just not acceptable.
A Vancouver man believes he was racially profiled by Icbc when trying to renew his driver's license. The 44-year-old has lived in Canada since he was a child and says the auto insurer took months to investigate his residency. He's finally received his license, but says he never got an adequate explanation as to what happened.
They're in tears. They're so happy. I mean, it's hard not to get emotional.
People in Whistler lined up today to get their COVID-19 vaccine. The resort community is being fast-tracked for mass vaccination of all its residents after being linked to the largest outbreak of the P1 COVID variant outside of Brazil. And joining us now is Dr. Michael Curry, ER physician at Delta Hospital. Dr. Curry, nice to see you again tonight. I know you watch the daily COVID numbers pretty closely, more than 3,000 new cases over the weekend, 18 deaths, 368 people now in hospital, and 121 of those folks in intensive care. And I gather that's the ICU number that you looked at first.
Yes, I think the ICU number is the key number. And so the issue that we're facing is that if our ICU capacity gets overwhelmed, that means that life-saving interventions, for instance, mechanical ventilation, would potentially not be available to patients that could potentially have their lives saved by that intervention. So I think the key number in all of these statistics is our ICU utilization rate. And as that gets more full, we're getting into more and more of a danger zone where our ability to help the sickest of the sick may be compromised.
Yeah, 11% increase in hospitalizations in the last 3 days, Dr. Curry. I guess the fear is ending up like the situation in Ontario.
That's right. Currently, we do have excess ICU capacity. People who need life-saving care are able to access it. The problem is exponential growth, which is what viruses do, can overwhelm you very quickly. And so once we start getting very close to a full ICU, in a very short a time, we may be able to exceed that capacity to provide ICU care, which means we're going to back up into the emergency departments. And when our emergency departments are full of critically ill patients, we may be in a situation where we can't provide all the care that we need to provide to the sickest patients.
And 18 more deaths over the weekend. Where are these folks dying?
I think the majority of these patients are dying in hospital. Some of them are patients who have elected not to receive critical care interventions, whereas the others will be in intensive care units getting full life support, including mechanical ventilation and other critical care measures that are necessary for the people who are the sickest of the sick. Unfortunately, a small number of patients, even if we do everything medically available, are still going to succumb to the COVID-19 virus.
And what are you personally seeing in your ER there in Delta?
I'm seeing a big change from last year. Last year, we were seeing elderly patients, generally patients living in long-term care facilities. Immunization has done a great job in reducing the number of patients and the number of outbreaks we have in long-term care. However, now I'm seeing it in younger patients. There's a greater number of younger patients, and on average, they do better with COVID. However, as the numbers grow, that very small percentage of patients, when you multiply them by a large number of patients, we end up with real people that are needing life support and critical care interventions.
And just finally, what would be your advice to people at this stage?
I think the main thing is try to get vaccinated if you're in an eligible group, and try to do so as quick as you can. Vaccines have had a great impact upon the people who've received them. Unfortunately, not everyone has received them. The second is stick by with what we've been doing for the last year. Continue to socially isolate. Make sure you try to minimize social interactions and going out. And when you do go out, mask, keep your distance, and wash your hands whenever you can.
All right, we will leave it at that. Dr. Michael Curry, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Michael.
A crisis in Minnesota after the police shooting death of a black man. Now more than 2 million people are under curfew. The shooting happened during the George Floyd trial, taking place just miles away. The latest next.
Doesn't get much better than that. Beautiful night on the South Coast, 6:43. Another stunning day here on the South Coast. And it looks like we'll be in for this for the rest of the week, maybe longer. How warm will it get? We're going to find out from Johanna next.
Dr. Chris and the vet team prepared to perform a hoof trim and vaccination on reindeer Lucy.
Those who are holding on to Lucy can go in first. We'll get her nice and secure before the rest of us come in. We'll get her in hand, we'll do the trim, we'll get her vaccinated.
Sure. Sounds good.
Lucy has an old injury inside one of her knuckles, so it doesn't wear down the way a normal reindeer hoof would. So we have to do it for her.
The most dangerous part is those antlers are pretty sharp, and you can't predict where a reindeer is going to dart when you go into catch.
For these quick procedures, the team does not want to risk anesthesia.
Okay.
Good girl.
Good girl. Good girl. Andrea, do you want to have a look in her mouth? And
While Dr. Chris does the trim,
Hi, sweetie pie. We do a quick oral exam on you.
Dr. Andrea examines Lucy's mouth and teeth.
I know, kiddo. 1, 2, 3. She's missing an incisor.
I'll take down a bit of this toe.
Smaller cousin of the caribou, reindeer still range in the thousands in the Canadian North. The species are well adapted for the Arctic, with an insulating coat and wide splayed hooves that keep them running fast on snow.
Easy, sweetheart. I need that foot.
Hey, sweetie. Doesn't look too bad back there. Okay, good.
So she had an injury at the calf where she actually broke right there inside the hoof. And as a result, her hoof now is just a little bit twisted and doesn't wear the way it normally should. So we have to give her a hand taking down some of the hoof wall. If we don't do a hoof procedure on Lucy, her hooves will continue to grow abnormally, and parts of her body are going to start experiencing stresses and strains that they're not meant for. That's a lot better.
When you're holding the reindeer, they tend to relax into you, but you gotta be careful because as soon as you let your guard down, the reindeer can spur up and take you for a ride.
Okay. I got it. Okay, sweetheart. Okay. Desiree's gonna poke in the back end. Get her vaccinated.
Yep. I'm done.
Vaccines are done?
Yeah.
Perfect. I think we're pretty good.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Good girl. I was surprised. Her sole was really overgrown. So it was just that thick white sole. So I filed that back quite a bit. But the energy level was a little surprising. She's a little put out right now, but she'll get over it.
She'll forgive us. Yeah.
More than 2 million people around Minneapolis are under curfew tonight, and new protests are underway as we speak following the latest fatal police shooting of an American black man.
It happened not far from where George Floyd's accused killer is on trial. Susan Ormiston has more, and we warn you, what you're about to see is disturbing.
Police had stopped Dante Wright for expired plates and then discovered the 20-year-old had an outstanding warrant. The attempted arrest went horribly wrong. Instead of using her taser, the officer pulled out her gun. The police chief today called it an accidental discharge.
It is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet.
Say his name! Dante Wright!
A deadly mistake, say many, at a terrible time, right in the midst of the trial in George Floyd's death. The National Guard and police surrounded the police station, a curfew imposed in Minneapolis and its suburb.
This anguish that we're all suffering cannot translate into violence.
But last night it did. Looting and confrontations outside Minneapolis, rising anger, which the local mayor tried today to soothe.
Our hearts are aching right now. We are in pain right now.
But the latest shooting lays bare again the tensions around police use of force. Dante Wright was a young father of a 2-year-old, an amazing son, said his mother.
He was my life, he was my son, and I can never get that back. Because of a mistake, because of an accident.
Community members want the police chief fired and the officer charged with murder.
What I witnessed was agitation, intimidation, irritation, and escalation.
All this as Felonious Floyd struggled to testify today about growing up with his older brother George.
He just was like a person that everybody loved around the community.
Tonight, a crowd gathered in Brooklyn Center in spite of a curfew.
Johanna Wagstaffe back with us again, and the forecast. You know, Joe, I did consider shorts for our hike this morning. It was so nice. I didn't end up going with it, but boy,
it is not that hot.
There are people wearing shorts. Come on.
I think there are some hopeful short wearers out there, yeah. But you know what? By, I'd say, end of the week, I might not have a shocked look on my face anymore if you told me you're wearing shorts for a morning hike. So let that be a sneak peek at the forecast ahead. Things are warming up to short weather by the time we hit Friday and Saturday. I kid you not. Let me show you the setup. As I mentioned earlier, it's a high pressure sitting across the interior. Our warmest setup for us on the south coast is when we get these ridges building in the interior. That clockwise flow ends up spinning down the warmer air from the interior towards the coast through our valleys. So a little breezy as we get that outflow setup over the next week plus. Taking you through the next 48 hours, not a lot of clouds to talk about at all. In fact, mainly blue skies. I will take you through the next 48 hours. There are some high clouds sneaking down from the northwest. Tuesday night, we may end up with some stripy cirrus above. I think that only makes for a lovelier sunset as high pressure almost gets kicked out by that approaching low, but nope, high pressure fights back and moves in across the interior. Almost all of BC staying dry and sunny for the long range. As I mentioned earlier, we will be watching for building fire danger and this is going to be the start of our spring runoff. These are the temperatures we need to start to see those above seasonal snowpacks begin their melt. So officials already sort of giving the heads up to people that creeks and rivers will be running high by the time we hit the end of the week. Look at these temperatures tomorrow across the province. 16 for Kelowna, 16 up towards Kamloops, 16 for Victoria. And even Prince Rupert, you might even hit the double digits tomorrow, going to be warming as we head into the long range. Take a look at the outlook. You can see we start to get into those green colors by the weekend. Those are the high teen, mid-20 temperatures, and we'll really feel it in through the interior as well. By mid to end week, we'll be hitting the mid-20s. We may even see our first 25-degree day of the season for the interior. And for us, these temperatures are for YVR. If you see just below those 14s, 15s, and 16s, inland temperatures will be hitting the 20s by midweek. So yes, short weather, not out of the question, Mike.
Good to hear.
Thanks, Joe. Well, if you've been hitting the local bookshop, you're not alone. How COVID has brought out the bookworm in us, coming up.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Join CBC Vancouver's Gloria Makarenko at the 2021 Because Mothers Matter Awards on May 5th. Celebrate the resilience of mothers during the global pandemic at this year's awards. And the Doxa Documentary Film Festival is May 6th to 16th. Enjoy thoughtful and engaging documentaries, panel discussions, and more, all from the comfort of your own home. Learn more at doxafestival.ca.
cows are getting a little extra TLC today from Logan Bryanton. That is part of what the Quality Milk Award is about. A farm score is calculated by the PEI Dairy Lab and reflects the quality of the milk as well as the health of the dairy herd.
Somatic cells are a good indicator of udder health. And so low cells means that the environment that the cows live in is clean and healthy.
Morgan says many factors contribute to a cow's udder health, including nutrition, sanitation, and biosecurity, and clean and comfortable housing. He says the attention that the Bryantons pay to the care of their cows is reflected in their production in the top 10% for Atlantic Canada.
Happy cows are productive cows. And farmers certainly recognize that.
Logan Bryanton helps to run the farm. He says it was a nice feeling to receive the Quality Milk Award for 2020 for his family and their 5 employees.
To win the award, it's a good representation for me to know we're doing the best job we can here, and that our staff, they appreciate seeing that too.
Bryanton says they pay close attention to the health of the herd.
We always try and keep our somatic cell count here the lowest possible, and we have computer systems, and not every cow has a collar on her, and we track rumination and daily activity, and we do milk tests every month and follow the herd pretty close.
Morgan says the association was not going to hand out the award in 2020 because of the pandemic, but were convinced by dairy farmers to hand it out.
When I picked up the trophy from last year's winner, which was Abe Elaine Farms, Elaine Buttimer was telling me how pleased they were to have received the award and how important it was to her and her dairy colleagues.
The Quality Milk Award has been handed out annually since 1984, a trophy and PEI bragging rights for a year. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Belmont.
Well, Jana, yeah, you're right. It has let up here as far as the snowfall is concerned, but you can tell that it's still pretty windy. Now, on streets, it's just kind of slushy and wet here, but I mentioned the wind, and check this out. There is some pretty decent snowdrifts for this time in April, some pretty deep snow here. Some of the reports I'm getting saying about 11 to 12 centimeters on the ground in Winnipeg up to late this afternoon, but there is more on the way, and that's why we still have a snowfall warning in effect. Check this out. Right across central Manitoba, 15 to 25 centimeters. That would be a total snowfall from late Sunday right through to late Tuesday. But late this afternoon, that snowfall warning was extended down into the Red River Valley to include Winnipeg and the rest of the southeast. So, Janet, there is more on the way tonight and more tomorrow, and the wind is going to stay strong as well. I'll be back in a few more minutes to tell you all about that.
Well, for years, independent bookstores have worried about the rise of online sellers, and the pandemic brought even more uncertainty.
But as Alex Migdal reports, some Vancouver bookshops are reporting their busiest year ever.
Books aren't flying off the shelves at the Paperhound bookshop. They're taking off on bike.
People like getting books by bike. They like the idea of it.
Kim Cook has been delivering books on wheels since opening the store she co-owns in 2013. But she's cycling more than usual during the pandemic.
At the height of it, we were out all day long, every day, delivering books.
Staying nimble is what's kept her shop afloat, down by 30% at its worst, and now just down 5% pre-pandemic. Still, an emptier downtown has changed her clientele.
We're used to having a lot of office workers and a lot of tourists and a lot of students and a lot of academics down here, and those are exactly the populations that aren't downtown right now.
Over on Main Street, stacks of book orders at Pulp Fiction, a sign of the business's busiest year since opening 21 years ago.
Our sales went really sharply up
And we pivoted from thinking that everybody was going to be staying at home to adding staff, adding an additional location, and just trying to keep up with demand.
Chalk it up to Netflix and Zoom fatigue.
A lot of customers are saying that being able to relax with a book that's not trying to disrupt your attention, that's not trying to sell you additional things, is just a kind of quiet, private space.
The experience isn't just about reading, but finding books too.
I feel like I always find something that I didn't expect in there.
It's just nice to kind of pick up and feel different books. I'm sure Chapters and Indigo and stuff are fine, and so I just wanted to support a smaller store.
This bookstore on Granville Island says it's finding its footing after opening last August. Co-owner Ian Gill says customers often ask the same question.
Are you crazy? What did you do opening in a pandemic?
But the space, a bright, airy room, and carefully curated collection has drawn in up to 200 customers each day. Gill hopes the space can soon serve as a literary arts studio and host events.
So those in-person, face-to-face things, we're really hoping we can do that in the next few months, because that's kind of what we did this for in the first place.
And with the pandemic's end in sight, the chance to start a new chapter. Alex McDowell, CBC News, Vancouver.
Yeah, I go to a local used bookshop just up the street from us, and I wanted to sell them or give them some books or whatever. Can't even get an appointment to give them books for months.
Wow, that's amazing.
Jam-packed.
It's remarkable that they have survived, not just the online, but the pandemic, and it really is amazing. What was the last book you read?
I'm not going to say. I just finished a book yesterday, but I don't want to say it on air.
The president is missing. Bill Clinton, James Patterson.
Well, that was a long time ago, I feel like.
There you go.
Yeah, you better get reading, Mike.
I know. I got to get back on it.
All right, that's it for our show tonight. You can always find it online at cbc.ca/BC.
Dan's here at 11 after the National. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.